What's up, team? Mikey Bella here with Outdoor Adventure Training, and today we're going to be diving into the nitty-gritty of how to train for backpacking. A brief Google search will give you a lot of conflicting evidence, and we're here to set the story straight on what is really the most effective approach so you can show up at the trailhead feeling your best and have an amazing time on your wilderness experience. We're going to be looking at how to optimize your training schedule, how to get the most out of your training hikes, how much weight you should be carrying, how long you should be going for, and optimal exercise selection for performing strength and stability workouts, which we'll find are super important to optimize your trail performance. This is a topic of conversation I'm super passionate about because I am a professional mountaineering and backpacking guide in the Pacific Northwest. I've guided a ton of backpacking trips along the Pacific Crest Trail, up and down big Cascade volcanoes. I've even led trips internationally to Nepal and the Himalayas, Everest Base Camp, and in Eastern Europe, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. All of this experience compared with over a decade of personal training experience, I have a very strong grasp on how to train effectively for multi-day expeditions in the backcountry. Before preparing this video, I did a hasty Google search of how to train for backpacking, and the #1 hit is REI's blog on how to train for backpacking. But how effective is this tool? Going through this blog with a fine-tooth comb, I found that it really misses the mark and it has some major shortcomings for those that are training for backpacking. As a professional backpacking guide and having actually guided trips for REI, this is super concerning because as a guide, the last thing I want is for my guests to show up misinformed and underprepared. First thing we're gonna be talking about is a training schedule. How to set up your calendar to train effectively so you can show up at day one of your backpacking trip feeling amazing. First of all, REI recommends starting to train about 8 weeks before you're going backpacking. 8 weeks, 2 months, really is not a lot of time to get the adaptation we're looking for to perform at your best. If you're entering a training program with a solid baseline of fitness or coming out of another training program into the spring and summer season, then yes, 8 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks for really well-trained individuals is enough. However, for the vast majority of the population, 12 weeks or more is really the ideal time frame to build up the adaptations so you can feel good and enjoy your experience. As I got into the bullet points of building your training schedule for backpacking, I really started to get irritated because of this word, non-consecutive. REI goes as far as to recommend 3 non-consecutive cardio sessions up until 2 weeks beforehand. This word non-consecutive implies that you have a cardio session, then you follow it up with a strength session, maybe the next day you have a rest day before your next cardio session. Well, I'll tell you what, the backpacking activity implies that you're gonna be walking on a trail day in and day out for 3, 5, 7, 9 or more days consecutively. So when we're training, we should be training consecutive days. I would strongly encourage you to do your best to program back-to-back training hikes. This is the best thing you can do to improve your overall aerobic performance and your resiliency to show up the next day when you're a little bit fatigued and tired to perform again. Because I'll tell you what, that's exactly what you're gonna be doing when you're deep in the wilderness and you're moving camp. I can't tell you how many times as a professional guide I've seen people crawling out of their tents in the morning, sore from the day before and not used to getting right back out on the trail. This same theory applies for the non-consecutive days of strength training, especially if you live in a location where you don't have access to a lot of elevation gain or you're limited on time because of your work and life schedule. It's that much more important to log back-to-back strength training days for the same reasons we just applied to the cardiovascular training. This 4th bullet point really is the apex of the qualms I have with REI's guide to train for backpacking. They recommend just 2 weeks before your trip to implement long day hikes of 60+ minutes each. First of all, 60 minutes is not a long day hike. A longer hike should be 2 to 3 or more hours. I often prescribe clients who are training for big backpacking or mountaineering objectives to log at least a few 4 to 6 hour hikes to really build up that strength and endurance and walking on their feet for a long period of time. 60-minute training hikes are not going to cut it. Next, we're gonna be talking about weighted training hikes. Just how much weight should you carry? The second half of this bullet point states that you should only carry 80% of the weight that you anticipate to carry when you're out on the trail. Practice like you play. If you practice with 80% of your weight, you're gonna struggle when it's 100% of your weight on your back. Furthermore, do you really know how much you're gonna be carrying on your back? Most people significantly underestimate all those last minute items, the last couple liters of water, the extra little food bag, or if you're going with a guided trip, even worse. We're always dishing out group gear like stoves and fuel, food bags, bear bags, all of those things add up. You should absolutely be training to at least 100% of the weight you're gonna be carrying on your trip. And actually, I would recommend carrying 110 to 120% of the weight you anticipate carrying. That way your body is used to it. It knows what to expect. You know how to pick up a heavy backpack, and you show up with confidence that this 40-pound backpack is not going to crush you. Furthermore, having the confidence that you can carry more weight is going to help you in case of an emergency and risk mitigation. If you're in a group of people and somebody twists their ankle and you need to absorb their gear to help get them back to the trailhead, and you've never carried a 45-pound pack, it's gonna be that much more difficult, and you're setting yourself up for injury too. So especially myself as a professional guide, I train with a heavy backpack just in case I need to absorb gear, and so the pack that I am carrying is well within my wheelhouse. This helps increase our safety margin so you're not pushing that needle a little too far when you're out in the field. I am not suggesting that on week 1 of your training program, you should load up a 60-pound backpack and go hike up a hill. Quite the contrary. We need to do this in a slow, stepwise fashion, starting with a lighter pack weight, and over a 12-week or 8-week period, slowly ramp up that load every single week. So by the time you get to that really heavy backpack, you've built the baseline stability and strength that's necessary so it doesn't feel like too much to ask. Exercise selection. Which exercises should you perform to train effectively for backpacking? There are ways to train for backpacking outside of just weighted training hikes. In fact, you're gonna get much more out of those hikes by implementing structured stability and strength training. When you're considering which exercises to select, we want these movements to be as sport specific as possible. So think about when you're walking uphill, walking downhill, walking on flat ground with a backpack on, which movements most closely mimic the movements you're gonna be doing out in the field. The first things that come to my mind and the exercises that I absolutely love to implement for training for backpacking are things like lunges, whether it's forward or reverse. Even side lunges can have benefits. All different kinds of step up variations, as that's exactly what you're gonna be doing when you're walking uphill, and step down movements to replicate moving downhill. Any single leg movement is an incredible way to improve your balance if you're on uneven terrain. And plyometrics cannot be overlooked, as they really help improve your agility and your reaction time if you're on a rocky trail or a slippery slope. So looking into what REI recommends for exercise selection, the very first thing they say is jump squats, which jump squats are a good exercise, and I love prescribing this for people who are training for skiing. Not so much for backpacking. When are you gonna find yourself doing jump squats on your backpacking trip? Jump squats are all about building power in the posterior chain, which, while that can be important if you're faced with a big step on a backpacking trip on a steep climb, really what we're after is building strength endurance, yes, through the posterior chain, but also through our adductors and our quadriceps. Furthermore, if we really get into the nitty-gritty and break down her form, it's very obvious that her left knee is caving in quite a bit, which is absolutely not what we want at all performing any plyometric exercise. You know, a few of the other exercises on here, like this hip roll movement, I'm not a huge fan of, but I could see how it could be beneficial for some. Of course, the step up exercise, again, really emphasizing good form. I don't love the way that she's hinging so far forward and really pushing with her knee. I don't see a lot of posterior chain activation here. Also, a stable surface about 8 inches off the ground. While that might be a really good place to start for your first week or two, Ideally, we are steadily increasing the height of that box to 12 to even 18 inches is really the sweet spot for most people to maximize that strength, endurance in the posterior chain, adductors, and quadriceps. Continuing down the list, this heel down exercise, I really call this a reverse step up, is an amazing exercise. Again, she's really hinging at the hip. I don't see a lot of that forward drive in the knee. She's actually dropping her hips back, again, targeting that posterior chain, which could be good. But again, that quadriceps strength is so key, especially for the descent, which, believe it or not, I see guests struggle far more on the descent than on the uphill. The single leg Romanian deadlift. Exercises really don't get a lot better than this. We're working on balance, full body proprioception. Even REI recommends this exercise. Again, I wouldn't model after this individual's technique. I would instead check out our YouTube tutorial video on how to do a single leg Romanian deadlift, an amazing tool to implement into your training program. REI does do a decent job of recommending several upper body, full body, core focus movements that are actually super important training for backpacking, especially when you're carrying that heavy load on the first few days of your trip. And while holding isometric core stability exercises like planks can be an amazing way to build that solid foundation, which we definitely implement these exercises with our clients, integrating more dynamic core stability movements where you're removing a limb and maintaining stability, or actively bringing joints through the range of motion, that's what's ultimately gonna set you up for success in having a strong core in a dynamic environment, which is exactly what you're gonna be doing when you're out there backpacking. A quick blurb on this bullet point here: if something hurts, modify the exercise or skip it. I do agree that if you have an injury or it's sharp, acute pain, yes, maybe avoid that exercise. However, that should be your indicator that you need to figure out what's going on through mobility training, working with a physical therapist or massage therapist, whatever it is. You gotta get that small or lingering injury taken care of. We can't just avoid it completely. If step-ups hurt your knees, it might also just be that you need to do more step-ups. Being able to differentiate between an injury and being hurt and experiencing a little bit of pain is critical. There is some amount of pain that is required to go through when you're training for anything meaningful. Don't shy away from the challenge, but at the same time, know your limits and know how to listen to your body. Coming from a professional guide and certified personal trainer, I strongly feel that REI's How to Train for Backpacking blog really has a lot of shortcomings. Luckily, there are people out there that care about you a heck of a lot more than a big box store. While doing all this research, I developed this really in-depth How to Train for Backpacking guide that covers everything we've talked about today and much more. How to build your own training schedule for backpacking, both on a macro scale, zooming out, and on a micro scale, week to week, how you should program your activities. I also went way into the weeds of how to set up your training hikes and how to slowly build up, and to use heart rate zone training, which is something that REI didn't even touch on, and really spending a lot of time on building that strong aerobic base. If you want to learn more in depth about that, check out our 12-week training blueprint video. I also talked in depth about strength training for backpacking, whether or not you need weights or other equipment, and sample exercises that can really help fortify your training for building stability, strength, endurance, and some plyometric exercises to choose from. Lastly, we can't talk about training without talking about active recovery. Here we're looking at mobility training, nutrition, and other things that are gonna support your well-being. That's where a lot of people fall short. Don't just ramp up your training load, ramp up your self-care practices as well so you can avoid injury and burnout. If you're still feeling overwhelmed about how to train for backpacking, no worries. OAT has got you covered with our Backpackers Boot Camp program. This is a 90-day periodized program that encapsulates everything that we're talking about here today and in that blog into an easy to follow training program, complete with daily workouts, cardiovascular training, and mobility training, so you can show up at the trailhead with confidence that you are not only gonna make it to camp, but enjoy your experience and your body's gonna hold up just fine. Head over to our website at outdooradventuretraining.com/backpacking and start your 7-day free trial today. We would love to hear more from you. Leave us a comment below. Let us know how you train for backpacking. Did you learn anything new from this video? We are here to support you every step of the way in training effectively for your favorite outdoor adventures. Thank you so much for watching today. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your backpacking buddies. Don't forget to subscribe to the Outdoor Adventure Training YouTube channel. We got a ton of great content coming your way, and we'll see you next time here at Outdoor Adventure Training.